The moon hung low in the inky black sky, casting eerie shadows across the quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a night like any other until the unexpected happened. I lay in my bed, tossing and turning, unable to escape the oppressive heat that clung to the air like a shroud. Sweat trickled down my brow as I tried to drift into a restless slumber. Down the hall, I could hear the muffled snores of my parents and the rhythmic breathing of my little sister, Emma. The night was still, save for the occasional chirping of crickets and the distant hum of passing cars. But then there came a sound that made my blood run cold. A soft, mournful wail that seemed to emanate from the very walls of our home. I shot up in bed, heart pounding in my chest. The sound grew louder, more haunting, and now I could make out words in the midst of the ghostly lament. It was a woman's voice, trembling with anguish. "Help me. Please, help me." My parents stirred, awakened by the same unsettling sound. My father, a practical man, muttered something about the wind and tried to go back to sleep. But my mother, her eyes wide with fear, sat up in bed and clutched her blankets. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. My sister Emma was awake now too, her eyes as round as saucers. We nodded in silent agreement. The voice continued its lament, growing stronger with each passing moment. It was as though a spirit had taken residence in our home. With trembling hands, my father reached for the bedside lamp and switched it on. The room was bathed in warm, reassuring light, dispelling the eerie atmosphere that had settled upon us. But the voice did not stop. It seemed to be coming from somewhere within the house. "We need to find out where that's coming from," my mother said, her voice shaking. Reluctantly, we left our beds and followed the sound down the hallway, our footsteps echoing ominously in the quiet house. As we approached the source of the ghostly cries, they became more distinct, and I could hear the desperation in the voice. "Please help me. I'm trapped." The voice led us to the attic door, which stood ajar, creaking softly in the still night. My father, taking the lead, slowly pushed the door open. The attic was dark, shrouded in shadows, but there was no mistaking the source of the mournful cries. In the far corner of the attic, bathed in an eerie, ghostly light, stood the translucent figure of a woman. She wore a tattered white dress, and her hair hung in disheveled tendrils around her pale face. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, and she reached out to us with transparent, trembling hands. "Help me, please," she pleaded. My family stood frozen in terror, unable to move or speak. The ghostly woman seemed to be trapped in some eternal torment, forever seeking release from her anguish. Her presence was suffocating, and I could feel a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, the ghostly figure began to fade, her cries growing fainter and fainter until they were nothing more than a distant whisper on the wind. The attic returned to darkness, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. For a long moment, we stood in silence, trying to comprehend what had just transpired. It was a night none of us would ever forget, the night our family was visited by a ghost. And though we may never know who she was or what had brought her to our home, her anguished cries would haunt our dreams for years to come. A chilling reminder of the otherworldly mysteries that can encroach upon our lives when we least expect them. In the days that followed, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The memory of that ghostly apparition lingered like a shadow in our home, casting doubt on our once serene existence. My parents began to research the history of the house, hoping to uncover some clue about the tormented spirit that had crossed our path. It wasn't long before they discovered the grim truth. Our house had a dark history, one that had remained hidden for decades. It turned out that a woman had lived in our home many years ago, a woman who had suffered a great tragedy. Her name was Eleanor, and she had lost her husband and child in a terrible accident that had occurred in our very attic. Eleanor's grief had consumed her, and she had become reclusive, rarely leaving the attic where she had once shared so many happy moments with her family. She had died alone and in despair, her spirit unable to find peace, determined to help Eleanor find the peace she had been denied in life. My family began researching ways to communicate with the spirit world. We consulted mediums, conducted seances, and even sought out the help of paranormal investigators. Each attempt brought us closer to the truth about Eleanor's tragic fate. One fateful night, during a seance led by a gifted medium, we finally made contact with Eleanor's spirit. She appeared before us once more, her ethereal form bathed in a soft, otherworldly glow. Tears filled her eyes as she spoke to us. "Thank you for trying to help me," she said, her voice no longer filled with anguish, but with gratitude. "I have been trapped in this house for so long, unable to move on, but now I can finally find peace." With the guidance of the medium, we helped Eleanor find closure and bid her farewell as she crossed over to the other side. It was a bittersweet moment, for we had grown strangely attached to the spirit that had once haunted our home. But as she faded away, there was a sense of relief in the air, as if the house itself had been cleansed of its dark past. In the years that followed, our home felt lighter, no longer burdened by the presence of a tormented spirit. The memory of that fateful night remained with us, a testament to the mysterious and otherworldly forces that could intrude upon our lives when we least expected them. As for my family, we had learned that sometimes the line between the living and the dead is not as clear-cut as we might believe. And though our encounter with Eleanor had been terrifying, it had also been a reminder of the power of compassion and the importance of helping those in need, even if they were from the world beyond. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway for 4 friends: David, Lisa, Mark, and Sarah. They had rented a cabin in the woods, about 3 hours away from their city. They packed their bags, loaded their car, and hit the road on a Friday afternoon. The first 2 hours of the drive were uneventful. They listened to music, chatted, and joked around. They were looking forward to relaxing in nature, away from the stress of their jobs and lives. They had no idea what was waiting for them ahead. As they approached the last hour of their journey, they noticed that the road became narrower and more winding. The trees on both sides of the road grew thicker and darker. The GPS signal on their phones started to fade. They felt a sense of unease creeping in. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Lisa asked David, who was driving. Yeah, don't worry. The cabin is just around the corner," David said, trying to sound confident. He glanced at the map on his phone, which showed a red dot indicating their destination. He hoped it was accurate. They continued driving, hoping to see a sign of civilization soon. But all they saw were more trees, more curves, and more darkness. The sun was setting fast, and they had no idea where they were. Suddenly, they heard a loud thud from the back of the car. They felt the car shake and swerve. "What was that?" Mark exclaimed from the back seat. "I don't know, I think we hit something," David said, gripping the steering wheel. He slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. He got out of the car and walked to the back. He saw a large dent on the bumper and blood splattered on the license plate. He looked around and saw a deer lying on the road, its eyes wide open and its body twisted in an unnatural angle. It was dead. "Shit," David muttered. He walked back to the car and opened the driver's door. "Guys, we hit a deer. It's dead," he said. "Are you serious?" Lisa asked, getting out of the car. She followed David to the back and gasped when she saw the deer. "Oh my God, that's horrible," she said. She felt a surge of pity and guilt for the poor animal. "Is the car okay?" Mark asked, joining them. He inspected the damage and shook his head. "It's not too bad, but we'll need to get it fixed," he said. He looked at his watch and frowned. "It's getting late. We should get going," he said. "Wait, we can't just leave it here," Sarah said, coming out of the car. She looked at the deer with sadness and compassion. "We have to do something," she said. "Like what?" David asked. "I don't know, bury it or something." Sarah said, "Bury it? Are you kidding me? We don't have time for that," David said. He was getting impatient and annoyed. "Look, it's not our fault. It ran into us. It happens all the time. Let's just go," he said. He got back into the car and started the engine. He honked the horn and signaled for the others to get in. Lisa hesitated, but followed him reluctantly. Mark did the same. Sarah was the last one to get in. She gave one last look at the deer and whispered, "I'm sorry." She closed the door and buckled her seatbelt. David drove away from the scene, leaving behind a trail of blood on the road. He hoped no one would notice it or trace it back to them. He hoped they would reach their cabins soon and forget about this incident. He hoped they would have a good time after all. He was wrong about everything. As the group continued their drive through the darkening woods, the atmosphere inside the car became tense. The encounter with the deer had cast a shadow over their excitement for the weekend getaway. The narrow, winding road seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the unease they felt grew with each passing minute. After what felt like an eternity, they finally came upon a small clearing in the woods. The cabin they had rented was nestled among the trees, its warm, inviting lights glowing through the windows. Relief washed over the group as they parked the car and stepped out. "We made it," Lisa exclaimed, trying to shake off the lingering sense of dread from the earlier incident. The cabin appeared cozy and welcoming, a stark contrast to the eerie road they had just traveled. They entered the cabin and were greeted by the smell of a crackling fire in the fireplace and the promise of a relaxing weekend ahead. Despite their initial concerns, the group decided to put the unsettling encounter with the deer behind them and focus on enjoying their time together. They spent the evening cooking dinner, playing board games, and sharing stories. The warmth of the cabin and the company of their friends helped push the unsettling incident to the back of their minds. However, as the night deepened and the wind outside began to howl, strange noises echoed through the woods. Branches scratched against the windows, and eerie whispers seemed to seep through the walls. The group exchanged nervous glances, trying to reassure themselves that it was just their imagination playing tricks on them. As they settled into their respective bedrooms, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was not quite right about the cabin and the surrounding woods. The events of the evening had left them on edge, and they struggled to sleep in the unfamiliar, unsettling environment. Throughout the night, the woods seemed to come alive with mysterious sounds and shadows. They heard footsteps outside the cabin and whispers in the darkness. Panic and fear gripped them as they huddled together in the living room, wondering if they had made a terrible mistake by coming to this remote place. The hours passed slowly, and the group's exhaustion finally overcame their fear. As dawn broke, the unsettling phenomena seemed to subside. They cautiously ventured outside to inspect the surroundings and found no evidence of anyone or anything unusual. With the morning light, they decided to explore the woods around the cabin, hoping to dispel the lingering unease. Yet, as they ventured deeper into the forest, they stumbled upon a gruesome sight, a circle of stones with eerie symbols etched into the ground, surrounded by the remains of small animals. Their unease deepened, and they couldn't deny the sense that something malevolent lurked in the woods. They quickly retreated to the safety of the cabin, packed their bags, and decided to leave the remote cabin behind. Their weekend getaway turning into a nightmare they couldn't escape. As they drove away from the cabin, they couldn't help but wonder about the events of the previous night and the eerie road that had led them there. They had hoped for a fun weekend getaway, but what they had encountered was beyond their worst nightmares, leaving them with a chilling story they would never forget.